Hey everybody, welcome to Popcorn Therapy, where the stories we love tell us something about who we are, and today we're going to be discussing Bridgerton Season 4 with Emilee Nimetz. This is the Benedict Sophie season, the Benefi season, and of course we are going to be getting into some spoilers, so if you haven't watched the season yet, maybe go and watch it before you listen to this episode. We're also going to be discussing just a little bit about the Ugly Stepsister, which is a movie that came out in the last year or so. There are also some references to some folktales, and I just wanted to clarify because in that part of the conversation I forgot the names of them. Bluebeard is the most famous of the folktales that I'm thinking of there. There's a whole bunch of different folktales that connect and have the same theme in that way, but Bluebeard is the one that if you're familiar with any of them, you'll probably know that one. So thanks for your patience and waiting for these episodes to come out. I'm just doing the best I can with all the other things going on. There's going to be an episode coming out soon on the whole Lindy West debacle that some of you might be really into right now, so give me a couple of weeks. I want to talk about that. I have so many thoughts about that whole situation. You may or may not have been following it, but we'll be doing an episode on that. I'm going to be having Mel Z come back and talk soon. So there's lots coming, but just give me some time to get everything out. And so make sure that you're following me, wherever you subscribe to your podcast, you can do that. You can also follow at Julie Peters Wellness, TikTok, Instagram, Substack, wherever you do the social media thing, Facebook, it's the same name everywhere you go, Julie Peters Wellness. You can also subscribe to my newsletter, juliepeters.ca/subscribe. And if you do go to my website, you will find lots of other information about me, including a link to book for counseling and tarot. And I'm actually expanding my hours just a little bit right now. So if you've been trying to get in or you haven't been able to find a spot, you might notice that there's a little more room for you coming up in the next few months. So stay tuned for that. Thank you again for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe and all of those good things wherever you're getting this podcast. Share with your friends. All of that stuff really helps us out. And enjoy this conversation about Bridgerton Season 4 with Emilee Nimetz. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We're going to have a chat today about Bridgerton Season 4 with Emilee Nimetz. So welcome, Emilee. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So what do you think about the show in general? Like, how do you feel about Bridgerton?
I feel like Bridgerton is sort of like it's a romance genre. It's horny. It's very like pretty to look at, and I think the acting in it is so good. It follows a very like formulaic romance genre trope, I guess, with each of the stories. Generally, like, watch it every time it comes out. Like, it's one of those, to me it feels like event television. I remember when the first season came out, it was like kind of a frenzy, and I was like, okay, I gotta watch that. And since then I've gotten into it and watch it every time it comes out and renew my Netflix subscription for it and then swiftly cancel it because there's not much else on there for me right now. And
Emilee has given up on Love is Blind.
I can't do it with those heterosexuals. The world is already so bad. I'm like, I don't need a reminder, actually.
Yeah.
Which is like why
totally
Bridgerton is so nice, because it's like fantasy, like where love triumphs and you go through some drama. It's very melodramatic in a very fun way, and then like usually love triumphs in the end.
I like the concept of Bridgerton as speculative fiction. It has this interesting intersection between history, like historical fiction, and fantasy, right? Because it is a fantasy world, and it is one of those speculative fiction is always, what if something changed about reality, like then what would happen? And in this case, it's a fantasy of racial blindness, actually, which I think is interesting, and there are some criticisms I've seen about that, but it's imagining this world that's pretty historically accurate, except that race is not a factor. And in season 4, which we're going to talk about, class is certainly still a factor, but that's not related to race, which is kind of an interesting, it is a fascinating thing to think about in terms of fantasy, right? And yeah, I mean, I have enjoyed the show a lot too. I did a podcast actually about Penelope's story in season 3, which I really enjoyed. And I do like how it's kind of fluffy, fun romance watching, but they'll often pull in some interesting piece to explore or play around with a little bit. I think sex and consent have been really interesting in this show, the way that you're witnessing women's pleasure being centered. And I feel like that's been a thread throughout, is what's pleasurable for women, and, what does that mean, and how are people talking about it, how are they responding to it. And I think that was present in this season as well, including around Francesca's story, which was kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's nice to see it kind of like this shift of like what we typically see in TV and film, which is like unrealistic, but also like doesn't, like, it centers the male gaze and a lot of that. Like, to have that switch is really interesting, but then it also has that fantasy element of like everybody is like comfortable in their bodies and like can achieve orgasm, and like especially with this season, the most recent season, with like the virginity aspect of it all, which is I side-eye that a little bit. But like this virginity thing where it's like, oh, don't hurt me. And then it's like, oh, it's amazing. And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I mean, good for you, but that feels like fantasy to me a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I want to talk more about the Benefee of it all, the Benedict Sophie of it all. And so Sophie is in this interesting place in terms of class, right? Where she is the illegitimate daughter of a earl. I think he was an earl. So he was the nobility class, and then I think her mother was a maid. And it was his intention to take care of her whole life. And we get to know Sophie as a maid, as someone of this underclass, Benedict falling in love with her. And then, there was that virginity moment of her. Yeah, I found that really quite unbelievable, actually. So let me back up a little. I had some problems with this season, in a way that previous seasons I appreciated sort of that like refreshing perspective on sex. There's some gender and sexuality pieces that I didn't love in this season, and then I think there were some problematic things around the sexuality and the believability of Sophie taking certain actions considering where she was in her class. So that moment in particular where she and Benedict end up having sex, it's consensual, it's loving. And I think the consent piece is complicated by the class aspect, right? Like in this way where, someone's student can't actually consent to having sex with their teacher or their professor because there's such a power dynamic present in that, right? So even if the person says that they want to do it, the power dynamic is such that it makes that form of consent impossible. And I think that was part of what was happening here, right? Like Benedict took zero risk at all in having a sexual relationship with Sophie, and it like her whole life was on the line. And so and that was referenced a couple times. Like I think there was, she was getting advice, or maybe Benedict was, I forget who said it, but it's kind of like, of course she's going to say she wants to be with you. Like she's a maid and you are like this rich nobleman. Like that's not something where you can kind of trust that that's fully consensual, right? So that was one layer of the problem that I had with that whole relationship, is like the power dynamic was, I think that's what they were trying to explore, but I think it really made the possibility of consent, I don't know, complicated.
Absolutely, yeah. Like, he was effectively her employer. And so, like, him making sure, like, without him, she would literally be on the street. Like, that was a major plot point, was she needed that job, and without that job, she would be, like, in disgrace or whatever, like, whatever the kind of terminology was for that time. And yeah, I think that was what was so frustrating for me about it as well. I agree that in this season, there was this weird dynamic that made me, it took me out of it because I couldn't stop thinking about that. And the other thing too that I feel like they really explore is the character of Sophie is very smart. Like, she's smart and she is very like she's always thinking of these complications. She's always thinking of like her survival. She's constantly like, she's a few steps ahead of everybody because she's so aware of her position and this strange position that she's in, because she has like education, she's smart, she can read, she can do all of these things that typically maids can't do. And Lady Bridgerton, or as I like to call her, MILF Bridgerton, as MILF Bridgerton likes to comment on, she's like, this is so strange that you can read, you know, like, what's that about? And she's like, she's so aware of like, I can't give anything away, and if anybody finds out, you know, I'll be like, this will be bad for me. And so I didn't like, I found like the stakes were so high with that it felt strange. Like, how was she able to relax into that sexual dynamic if that was what she was thinking about 100% of the time? You know, the moment in the stairwell when he like fingers her, I felt like that was more believable because they were like in this moment of passion, and like it was that, no, how dare I, like I can't, and you know, very romancy. But then in the second half of the season when they have sex, and then the scene with the bath as well, like I just felt very like it was the world was too big for me to believe that could happen, which is different from the other seasons where it's like there was like other factors that were kind of influencing things, but the relationship dynamic drove the plot. Whereas this time it felt like the relationship dynamic couldn't be driven by everything because the world was too big for it. And I just was like, no, but she's too smart to do this. Like, she's too smart. I don't know. I didn't believe it.
I think one thing that I struggled with as well is the special girl narrative of this season. And, you know, the first couple of episodes is a Cinderella story, right? It's literally a masquerade ball. She's the woman in silver. She leaves behind one glove, you know, and Benedict is going around trying to figure out, like, whose hand fits this glove, basically. And she's got this evil stepmother, literally, and two, like, quote unquote ugly stepsisters. Like, I don't think that was a part of it, them being ugly necessarily, but it was, you know, the stepmother trying to marry them off in these sort of somewhat nefarious ways and so on. And I was really wondering, what are they doing with this? Like, why so explicitly name the Cinderella story to begin this season? And one aspect could be fantasy, but also the Cinderella story it's a story about class. It's a story about kind of ascending from your position to become rich or whatever it is. And, you know, I think that the Cinderella story, like the version that, I could be wrong here, but the Cinderella story that we tend to know in the West, like the Disney story, has roots in the Ukrainian Vasilisa, the Brave story, which is this story about a girl who has an evil stepmother and two evil stepsisters, and her father has died and she's mistreated. And her stepmother tries to kill her essentially by sending her out to get the fire from the Baba Yaga, who's the evil witch of the forest. The evil stepmother thinks that Baba Yaga is going to kill this girl because that's what her reputation is, but Vasilisa is so special. Like, she has these special qualities. And in that story, she has a little doll in her pocket that was given to her by her mother, which kind of represents, like, her good intuition. And so the Baba Yaga gives her these impossible tasks, like, you know, sorting through a pile of dirt and picking out the poppy seeds and things like that. And she gets supernatural help to be able to do these impossible tasks so that she's able to avoid, you know, the Baba Yaga threatens, like, if you don't, you know, do these tasks, I'll kill you in the morning kind of thing. And so she survives this, and she ends up going back and burning up her her stepmother and stepsisters and the house and everything. And then she's found by the Tsar, who she's so beautiful and so special that the Tsar falls in love with her immediately, and she ends up becoming married to the Tsar, and that's kind of how that story ends. So it's not exactly Cinderella, but it's very aligned with it. And in the Cinderella story, we also have the supernatural help. And in this story, Sophie has the help from you know, Alfie and the other maids at, you know, the Pendleton house or whatever it is, in order to go to this ball and fall in love with the prince. And then, you know, it's the story kind of goes that way, right? And so the idea is that Vasilisa has, there's different ways to interpret it, but either she is special or she has some special help to allow her to survive this. And I feel like placing Sophie in this position of being the special girl. She's educated, she's very, very smart. It implies that she's smarter and better than all of these other people in the underclasses, right? Yeah. And that it's because she has this specialness connected to nobility that Benedict is kind of allowed to fall in love with her, and we're allowed to sort of transcend this class distance because she's not an uneducated, like, quote unquote dumb, underclass person. And I feel like the characterization of Alfie, I saw a reel about this and it kind of made me think a little bit about it. It was kind of making fun of how some of the characters' accents were. And Alfie has this very obviously, like, I'm just a dumb, cockney, whatever, like, because I'm a poor person.
I'm a guy from England.
Exactly, yeah. Exactly. And it's just, like, making so clear that these underclass people are underclass people, like, they stay in that role. And I did keep having these moments of, like, why not Alfie, right? Like, why is she not falling in love with Alfie? Why is this not, like, a love triangle? But that was never even questioned because it's sort of like the story felt a little bit like the exception that proves the rule, right? Like Sophie is someone that could transcend that class position because she was this special girl with this supernatural help or whatever it is. But an actual maid in that class, like, could never do that. They could be a mistress maybe and these other things, and there was some conversation about that. But there would be no crossing of that boundary, without some of that specialness that Sophie had. And that bothered me, like, I feel like it was sort of highlighting everyone else in that class as belonging there. But because she was special, she was allowed to come out of it.
Oh my gosh, that's exactly right. Like, and it's frustrating too because we see these characters and you like them. Like, you like Alfie, you like, I forget her name, but she has, like, the limb difference. You really like her. You really like, I think it's at the Pendleton house, like the older woman, like the team of people who basically get her to the ball in the first place. Like, they're all so amazing and kind, and they're all like, we must help her out. And it's like, yeah, you're right. It's the exception that proves the rule, that it's like, no, but these people stay below, and the class system is part of this world that we just accept, And I think that's a little bit where the dissonance comes from, like, especially when we're examining, like, a world, bringing it back to your conversation around speculative fiction. It's like, this is a world that ignores racial hierarchies and racial dynamics in a time period where those things wouldn't be ignored. But it doesn't ignore the class dynamics, and that there is a dissonance there because those things in reality are not, they're inseparable. And obviously around the world there's different meaning associated with different groups and things like that. But to try and, like, separate those things out and then have us just accept it and be like, oh, she's this special, beautiful, she's so beautiful. Like, no one has ever been so beautiful, like, it does feel a little bit, it feels less interesting, where it felt like the other seasons, like, Penelope being, like, a bigger person felt very, like, innovative and exciting and thrilling because, like, it was her body and there was no shame associated with it, and it was, like, good, great. But it being this class dynamic that is, like, that we're not transcending, the class hierarchy remains, this world functions with this hierarchy, and we just go on from that. And it felt a little bit like they were trying to pull one over on us, like, because those things just, like, all don't really make sense together.
Yeah, the show is selective about what realities we're ignoring and what realities we're seeing as a really big problem. Mm-hmm. I did appreciate that there was awareness. I don't know, I felt like in the first episode it was funny because all of a sudden we're seeing some of the maids interact like, we'd never seen that before, and it was a little bit of a hint of, like, oh, that's what this season is going to be about, because all of a sudden we have this story for the first time. We've never had this story before. And there were all these moments of, even the queen, she says something like, I don't have any maids. Like, what are you talking about? Yeah. So her guy is like, we have, 200 maids in the castle or whatever it is. And she's like, oh, of course. I think that the show did kind of show some of the people as ignorant of those things. Like, Benedict had to really be taught a lot of things about what it meant that Sophie was in this class. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so I thought that was interesting, and I'm still sitting a little bit with why this Cinderella story, because of course, part of the work that I do right now is storytelling and folktale mythology. Like, I'm really interested in this, and a lot of what these stories are for is teaching people something about, the reality of the world that they live in. And one thing that's come up recently that I thought is quite interesting is that, I've studied a lot of mythology, and the mythologies are like these big religious stories, right? That kind of tell a people like who they are, what this culture is, what it means. A lot of the time mythology is about the realities of nature that we have to face. This idea of like thunder gods that can't be displeased, or, goddesses of the river, or whatever it might be. Whereas folk tales are actually, they're often like this idea of old wives' tales. They're tales that are told often by women or the underclasses, in these, not necessarily secret places, but in the separate places where the powerful people are not. And so a lot of folk tales have this really dark perspective to it. Like there are quite a few of these folk tales that are about a woman who discovers that her husband is abusive or violent or murderous or something like that. And the story is about how she finds a way to escape, or how she finds a way to let people know what's going on. For example, like she's raped and then her tongue is cut out. And so she weaves into a tapestry, because she can't write, but she weaves into a tapestry, like the story of what happened. And that's how justice is found. Or there's another story where, a woman finds like her new husband's room of murdered ex-wives. And the only way that she can do this is like she, at a dinner with her family there and his family there, she tells the story of a dream she had, but then she brings forward the truth. So she's able to kind of tell the whole story and then bring the evidence forward. And I think this is really interesting because a lot of these stories are kind of sanitized the way that we hear them now, but they were often very violent because that was a reality, especially of people who had less power. And the old wives' tales, quote unquote, like the tales told by these underclasses, around the fire at night or whatever it is, would be the stories that could help them survive the realities of this, right? So interesting that we have this Cinderella story, which is originally a folktale, if you're thinking of Vasilisa, with, the threat of like Baba Yaga's going to eat you in the woods, and she ends up killing her stepmother and all of these things. And, you could talk if you want a little bit about The Ugly Stepsister, which is a movie that I was too scared to watch, but you had lots of thoughts about. There's violence in these stories because the violence is a reality, of people who have less power so much of the time. And this is another one of those stories that was kind of co-opted in this way and sanitized in this way, where it's told as this fantasy romance. But, and I mean, I think that's what it was. But an alternative version of this is that Sophie was forced into this marriage with Benedict because she had no other choice, right? And then how's she going to escape it? Like, that could be a whole other way of thinking about that story.
Totally. Yeah, I think it's interesting to consider, like, we're talking about a folktale story in a romance genre, like the genre difference between those things and like what they do for the reader or for the viewer is interesting. And so it's interesting to kind of like try and blend those stories, or those genres rather, when it's like the romance genre does something very specific, which is like horny and fun and dramatic and loving, and the folk genre does this other thing that's very like moralistic, or it's telling, it's highlighting injustice or inequality or some kind of social thing. So yeah, it's interesting that it almost attempts to blend those two genres together. But yeah, in the conversation around The Ugly Stepsister, this was a film, I think, it sort of came out widespread in 2025. It was nominated this year for like, I think, a makeup Oscar. It was a very body horror version of the Cinderella story, but told from the perspective of the ugly stepsister. And it was disgusting and crazy. But the whole thing was that the ugly stepsister, like the stepmother, was trying to make her beautiful. So it was like she was going through all of these cosmetic procedures, but of an older time. So very, like almost steampunky in terms of the aesthetic of like, the device to give her a nose job was like an iron pick that they're like jamming to like, remove the bump from her nose. And she has to eat like a parasite that is going to make her not hungry, so she loses weight. And then it's a tapeworm, and it has the most repulsive ending I've seen in a movie in a long time, and that includes the substance. It was so gross.
Oh my God. I loved The Substance. I think about it all the time, but I could never watch it again. It was too disgusting.
Yeah. The Ugly Stepsister was very that. But it was interesting, yeah, because it was like reframing this idea of like, it wasn't that like these stepsisters were ugly and the mom was like, oh, I got to marry them off. It was like the mother was trying to make them beautiful, like by the Cinderella standard. Like the ending was, because there were two sisters. The younger sister in The Ugly Stepsister is like very gender nonconforming, like very non-binary, very like trans mask almost. Like she's the one who kind of shows up at the end to save her sister, and she looks like a young boy, and she, you know, she's like got her hair pulled back, probably because she's witnessing the ways in which her sister has to be subjected to like the perils of femininity. That it's like, I don't want to have anything to do with that. Relatable. And you know, I just thought that was really interesting because it's like, right, the fantasy isn't for you.
Yeah. So The Ugly Stepsister, I think the tapeworm is especially interesting right now. I feel like we're in a moment of such extreme thinness for, you know, what's happening on the red carpets and stuff like that. Not that that's never really gone away, but I feel like with the rise of Ozempic and the ability that people have to use that as kind of an anorexic tool, and I mean, you know, I think it's really interesting that Catherine O'Hara was on a red carpet like a year ago or whatever it was, actively dying of cancer. Nobody knew that, and she was getting complimented about how thin she was at the time, like how great she looked, yeah. Right? And, you know, I remember when I was really quite sick, I would get the same kind of comments, right? Like I was very thin because I was really sick, and I would get a lot of people saying how good I looked and all this stuff. And it's a weird thing to be told you look great when you're like actively suffering and, you know, like things are not working in my body. Like that's why I'm so thin, you know? And so, the perils of femininity is the phrase that you used, and I think that's a really interesting way to put it. And so here we are in Bridgerton, and we have that same sense of, I mean, the evil stepmother, like I think the show did a little bit of work around, you know, she's not just plainly evil, like she's sort of trying to survive in her own way. The stepsisters were not evil either. Like I think the older one, I forget her name, but the one who was kind of married off or whatever it was, she was kind of innocent to what was going on. She just like thought this was a great match for her and whatever. It kind of surprised her that her match only wanted her because he thought her dowry was bigger than it was supposed to be. And then Posey, I think, was the younger one. She was more close with Sophie and, you know, kind of tried to help her by stealing these shoe clips, which was actually like a horrible thing. Like she should not have done that. She put Sophie in way more danger, you know, than she recognized. And so, yeah, I feel like there is this peril that the show, like it doesn't completely ignore it. I feel like it does introduce the peril, but then it smooths it over, right? In these various ways to kind of forgive everybody and get to the other side of that. And I think that, I guess what I'm thinking about The Ugly Stepsister is that movie showed the real, like literally ugly side of what it can mean to be trying your best to fit that femininity that allows you to have power, right? The idea of being that special girl, being really beautiful. Like, what if Sophie was just regular looking? You know, like then what would this story have been, right? Like she has to be extremely beautiful in order for this to work. And in a way that imperils her because, you know, there are a few moments where the maids are getting assaulted by the powerful men who, again, there's no cost to them if they have sex with these maids, but if somebody finds out or God forbid they get pregnant, it's a huge risk for them, right? And so their beauty in a way is like part of their liability. So, you know, my sense is just not that the Ugly Stepsister movie is directly related to Bridgerton, but I feel like it's showing a version of this, right? Like the really dark, ugly side of this that we skate right over in Bridgerton, I think.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Like the cost of the marriage market, and it's interesting, like you're talking about like what we're seeing today, and it's almost like that cost has never really gone. Like the idea of like needing to be beautiful in order to be desirable, you know, regardless of whether or not that's going to get you into a noble marriage or whether that's going to be the thing that it frees you within the confines of patriarchy and capitalism and all of these things. Like, if you can just be so utterly beautiful, or in today's world, so utterly skinny, like, then you are worthy of attention, you are worthy of money, you are worthy of all of these things. It's almost like the marriage market that we see in Bridgerton, that is like openly talked about in Bridgerton, and which is, we're exploring the darker side of in the Ugly Stepsister. It's the same thing that we're seeing all we're seeing on the red carpet is bones. It's just bones. I'm looking at everybody's bones. I can see every single bone. I can see the full anatomy of somebody's shoulder. It's jabbing me in the face. I'm like, holy shit, there's so many bones, you know? And like, that is the thing, I guess, that is the, like, quote unquote desirable thing right now, that is going to get you that access of power, which is, it's quite disturbing, you know? It's like, if you can be on the verge of death, honey, you're gonna look so good. It's like, I'll stay fat, actually. I'm good staying fat over here.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the other thing about that is, you know, as you're saying, if you're fitting whatever the beauty ideal is at the moment, that affords you some power, mm-hmm. right? And I think it's significant that emaciation is the beauty ideal at the moment. Yeah. Because again, there's ebbs and flows with this, but, you know, we're kind of in this strange moment. Let's remember that this is an American show, like it's, you know, set in Britain or whatever it is, but it's for an American audience, right? Yeah. And right now, I feel like we're having this interesting moment of heightened tensions around gender, right? Gender politics, who has power in terms of gender. Again, I think it's significant that the Ugly Stepsister's sister was kind of non-binary in this way, like, you know, rejecting the gendered ideals of the time, and that was what rescued her literally from this nightmare that she was in, right? You know, we're in a moment where I feel like there's this one perspective which is highly conservative, right? Family values, trad wives, incels, you know, just the whole kind of modern family value kind of thing, marriage as a value, all of that. And then on the other side, there are a lot of women who are becoming more and more powerful, making more and more money, and there are also people who are rejecting the gender binary, who are more and more visible, more and more allowed to exist, like having more and more power in those ways. And so those two things are fighting against each other. An emaciated person, regardless of gender, is weaker physically, right? I saw a really interesting reel recently about the connection between sort of a highly Botoxed face and numbness. Like this idea that if you have done specifically like the neurotoxin where your muscles don't move in a certain way anymore to prevent wrinkles, it also means you can't make certain facial expressions, right? What is the quote unquote ugliest wrinkle? It's the one right here between your eyebrows, which is when you're mad. That's what that is, right? And so smoothing women's anger, like smoothing, you know, a person's facial expression, right? We want it to look like you've had less feeling. We want it to look like you care less. We want it to look like you are innocent and young, in the sense that you don't have the kind of wisdom and experience that brings you power, right? And I don't mean to say this to put down anybody who's getting Botox and doing the things they want to do to feel good in their body. Like, that's not what I mean. But I think it's just and also everyone has the right to, you know, want the body they want, lose weight, all those things. Like, you know, there is that discomfort of commenting on a person's body that you're seeing. You don't know their story. And the fact that this is what the current beauty ideal says something about who we are as a culture right now, right? And, you know, the tapeworm beauty ideal where it's like you are sick, like you can't, you know, at that level of thinness, like malnourishment, being underweight is actually quite dangerous in a lot of ways, right? And, you know, you're going to be less able to fight the revolution, you know, if you don't feel anything, if you are so thin, it's the only thing you can focus on. Like, you know, there's a reason why that's our beauty ideal right now. Well, and it is about power. Totally.
And it's directly linked to the rise in fascism that we're seeing. Like, I think of this time, you know, we, like, as in our age group, we grew up with the really dangerously thin situation of, like, the early 2000s with, like, the Kate Moss, the Paris Hilton of it all, where everybody was so thin, where the jeans were so low, we saw the full abdomen, and it had to be flat and like very tiny, and
you wanted the hip points poking out. That was like fashionable at the time.
Yes, yeah, and your jeans had like 3 teeth of a zipper, like
right.
so crazy, and you couldn't have a belly in something like that. It would look very different than how it looked in the magazine. And then we saw this change. Like, I do think that there was this sort of reaction to that in the culture with, you know, even though it was linked to kind of an extreme capitalism, like with the Kim Kardashian of it all, where like suddenly like BBLs and having an ass and having tits and like having a body was like being talked about in the mainstream, you know, like we had shows and, well, based on the book Shrill, but we had the show Shrill, which starred Adie Bryant, that was like all about being a bigger person with a loud mouth. And we saw that era of like contemporary feminism that was like beginning to talk about these things. And it seems, and then gender was also being talked about within that time frame. And it seems like we're swinging back really hard against that, because that was a sense of freedom. Like, you know, the body positivity movement isn't one that says it's okay to be skinny. Like, we already know it's okay to be skinny. The world has never discriminated against thin people. So the body positivity movement, or rather the fat liberation movement, was really about being like, fat people exist. They can be healthy. They can exercise, you know, and the fat liberation movement was not to be like, you know, like, I think that when we're seeing the swing back right now, we're seeing a lot of people like, oh, you can't comment on these celebrities that are so skinny because what if they're going through an illness? It's like, yeah, they are going through an illness. The illness is called anorexia, actually. It leaches calcium from your bones. It's very fucking dangerous. You can die from it. People, it's one of the highest causes of death in, like, I think teen girls or something like that. Like, it is a very dangerous illness. It's a physical and mental illness. And people are like, we can't talk about it. We can't comment on women's bodies. It's like, no. That conversation around we can't comment on women's bodies wasn't about, let's not comment on skinny people's bodies. Skinny people's bodies were the ones that were commenting on, saying, like, look how good you look, girl. What we're saying is you can't comment on fat people, like, in the way that you have been. You know, like, we can't always be bringing things back to how thin you look. That's what that conversation is really about. So I really reject that idea that it's like, we can't comment on people. What if they're sick? It's like, yeah, we know they're sick. They have anorexia. Like, that's what the illness is. It's a collective illness. We're seeing it. It's a complete reaction to the slight, like the millimeters of power, or not even power, but like the millimeters of representation that occurred in that like tiny window of time. And we're swinging back so hard against that. That's why you're seeing like such a rampant transphobia that's happening right now. That's why you're seeing such a rampant racism that's happening right now. And just like the connection to fascism and the threat of war, like anorexia being the thing that is like extreme anorexia, I mean, being the thing that is happening alongside of that, is it like, that's a direct correlation that makes sense, because exactly what you're saying, if you're too weak, if the calcium is being leached out of your bones because you're not eating enough, what that means is you will not be able to go the distance in the revolution. You're not going to physically be able to fight. And wouldn't that be so great for people who have an interest in patriarchy and upholding patriarchy, white supremacy, colonialism, right? Like that serves a specific purpose.
It feels a little bit like the not commenting on people's bodies, or women's bodies in particular, maybe feels a little bit like the race blindness in Bridgerton, you know, where it's just like, we don't talk about this thing, even though it's there, but we're not going to talk about it. And I think there is a difference, you know, between making fun of like a particular person's body because they look very thin or whatever it is, or because they are fat or whatever the thing is, like picking apart a certain person's body and judging that person for that, is different from being able to comment on, I'm noticing that there's this huge trend right now in fashion and so on, where it seems that women's bodies are disappearing more than they were before. Like, I feel like you're commenting on a different thing, because it's true that you never know what's going on inside of someone. And I feel like, you know, picking apart the individual things that's happening, like that is that very 90s, like 90s, 2000s tabloid culture of like, she gained weight, she lost weight, like, look at this hand or whatever it is. I showed you something where Someone was saying that a certain very thin celebrity's hand movements were because she was an alien. And I was like, no. She's very ill, actually. Like, this, if she's twitching a little bit, like, that's because something's going on here. Like, it's not because she's an alien. Like, that's not the place to take that. So I feel like it's that kind of thing where that's different, right, from what we're talking about here, which is, what does this mean, right? Like, what's happening with this? Because these people who are on the red carpet and so on, they're not just people hanging out doing their thing. They are representing the beauty ideal. They're representing Hollywood celebrity. They are, I feel like we treat Hollywood the way that Greek gods once were treated, right? Like, we want to know what's happening with them.
Yeah.
That's what this celebrity culture means, stars, right? Like, they're special people because they represent something to us. And so I feel like if we're pretending that doesn't exist, we're not talking about a really important thing that is happening to us, right? Which is, this is what we're seeing. This is what our children are seeing. This is what we're being shown as the beauty ideal that affects our bodies, our minds, our mental health. Right?
And there's this
so, like, of course we need to talk about it.
Totally. And there's this other piece to that too, that is like, there are entire teams around each person that you see on the red carpet. Like, that person has an agent, a manager, an entire stylist team, an entire, like, they probably have a team of managers. There are people who are making decisions about somebody's appearance based on the cultural moment, and whether or not they're creating the culture or just feeding into the culture is kind of irrelevant, because it continues to kind of like push whatever the normative culture is, which is often aligned with like the dominant culture, which is aligned with like currently like a very extreme form of white supremacy and capitalism and patriarchy and colonialism and all of these systems that
and I mean, these different bodies are often racialized bodies too, right? Like, the very thin, it's like a white woman thing, like this very thin, emaciated, very pale skin, all of that. And a lot of the, curvy body, bigger lips, like all of these things come from like racist stereotypes around objectified Black bodies, right? Or objectified bodies that are people of color, which is also like fetishizing and reducing those, shapes, sizes, stereotypes, whatever it is, in this really specific way, which is again about, power. It's about who has power, right?
And like the way that power takes from culture, rather than like how power, it's still the same power. It's just like what is going to be more beneficial to the system, right? Because like, even when I'm talking about that brief period of time when we talk about the Kardashians, like that was like an extreme objectification of Black bodies and like Black culture, like with people getting the BBLs and breast implants and trying to make themselves look like this, was like, it was a lot of white people trying to like take Black from Black culture, right? And so it's now that is no longer of use to the far right, that is not even niche anymore. It's the main culture. It's blatantly the main culture, this like neo-Christo-fascist thing. It's a complete rejection of that as well, because no longer is that serving the capitalist machine.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I feel like this beauty standard, beauty ideal, gender binary kind of thing connects up with queerness, right? Which is the other piece I wanted to talk about with Bridgerton. So queerness, like that word itself, can mean difference, right? It's like being queer is stepping a little bit outside the heteronormative expectations of what your gender and your sexuality are supposed to mean, right? And like how you fit into that in terms of your identity. And, I listened to a really wonderful and fascinating episode of Material Girls, which is a podcast that I love and co-hosted by my friend Marcel, on Goblin mode, which is this thing that I didn't necessarily know too much about, but I guess during COVID, Goblin mode like had a moment, right? And it's this sort of idea of like when you're at home and you're only doing your Zoom meetings, if anything, and nobody sees you for weeks, like you can just goblin out a little bit into yourself. And one of the things that did was it allowed people to question a little bit, why am I wearing these uncomfortable shoes? Why am I putting makeup on every day? Like, why am I having to fit this ideal of what professional means?
not to mention the racialization of professional, right? Like the idea that like natural black hair or whatever it is like somehow unprofessional and needs to be like whited out essentially. But a lot of that kind of stuff came into relief when you can go goblin mode, right? And in this episode, which I can link, it was just a really interesting conversation about like what it means to kind of go goblin and how, you know, maybe you're less clean and you're like eating things that you want to eat like privately. And this idea of kind of that being goblin mode is actually bringing yourself a little closer to like your natural reality as a human animal, as opposed to this kind of curated version of a self that our civilized culture, quote unquote, wants us to be. And that there's a little queerness in that, right? It's like that little bit of kind of the naturalness of a spectrum, or the naturalness of like not having to fit into a really specific binary. So I thought that was a really interesting conversation, and I feel like moving away from the emaciation is like having a body that feels good to you based on the food that you want to eat and the movement you want to do and whatever it is. It's queer in a way, right? It's like refusing to fit into, you know, this is the beauty ideal where I want to be seen as like highly feminine, highly obedient, highly, you know, complacent to the rules that are being given to me, to the point that I will not eat, you know, the food that I need for my sustenance. And so all of that to bring it back to Benedict and what happened to the queerness in Bridgerton this season, right? Which again, I wonder if some of this is what's happening culturally, where there is this really conservative push, right? Violet Bridgerton has 8 children. None of them are queer at all. like there are 8 of them. Like statistically speaking, you know, there's got to be something going on there, right? And we did know that Benedict in past seasons had been exploring relationships with men as well as with women, and exploring relationships that were non-monogamous, right? Where it's like he's having threesomes, or he's having different relationships like co-occurrent to each other. There was some ethical non-monogamy stuff coming up with, I think it was the last season, where he was with this woman and she was like, well, it can be you and me, but we'll include this third. And he was like, oh, this is cool. Like, I'm into that. And then in this season, he falls in love with a special girl, and there's no more queerness. Gone. Just into the ether, right? Completely. And I was, you know, the first couple episodes, as someone who, like, I have always considered myself queer, though I'm very, like, heteronormative appearing from the outside, I was watching that kind of being like, hold on, what's the happy ending here, right? Like, for me, for someone who, I'm not sure if bisexual is quite the right word for it, it might be, but, you know, bisexual, queer, like someone who, whose sexuality doesn't fit into this, like, heteronormative, monogamous, like, one sort of category of self. What do I want here? Like, how do I want this to end? You know, what would be a happy ending for this? And I was thinking about that and posted a question about it online, which was interesting because some people got really mad at me about it. In part because, you know, I was questioning, like, if Benedict falls in love with Sophie and then he goes this sort of in this heterosexual direction, does that erase his queerness? Maybe part of the question is for me too, right? Like, I am in a pretty much monogamous heterosexual relationship, but that doesn't mean I'm not still bisexual or queer.
Yeah.
And that wasn't what I was trying to say, you know, but I feel like the show erased that queerness in the sense that, like, it was basically deleted as, like, he's a rake, which was insulting to me as well, right? In this perspective of, like, so if I'm wanting to explore my sexuality with different genders, that makes me, like, a whore would be, or a slut, right? Is, like, what that word means, a rake in this context. You know, none of those relationships meant anything. Like, he didn't have any romantic or love feelings for any of the men that he encountered along the way. Like, what happened to all of that questioning? He just fell in love with someone who was so special, and so smart and so pretty,
and a
that
virgin.
His queerness was no longer a problem, right? And what?
And a virgin.
And a virgin, of course, right? It's just, she's perfect in that heteronormative way, right?
Yeah, that's...
And I mean, let's be honest, in that moment, I was like, Benedict has been with a lot of people. I don't know how much he's using condoms. This poor girl is a virgin, and she's, you know, and it's just like, whoa, like, what are we doing? This is so dangerous on so many levels.
Yeah, like,
right?
Like, that's the first penis she ever saw, probably. You know, he's seen a lot. He's seen his own. He's seen other people's. He's seen many vulvas. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question of, like, in the romance genre, like, where does the bisexual or the pansexual or how does queerness factor into the romance genre? Because like, and I asked my friend, who is a romance author, I was like, how does bisexuality factor into that? Like, what in stories where there are bisexuals in the romance genre, what is the ending? Because typically the romance genre it has a happy ending, or a happy for now, they call it sometimes, an HFN. And so there is a sense of closure when it comes to relationships, that it often ends in a wedding, or it often ends in a union of some sort. And so if you are a person who is, I think in probably the more progressive genres, as my friend was telling me, what happens is the person's bisexuality, the author does a good job of making sure the person's bisexuality isn't erased in the context of the relationship that they're currently in. Like what you're saying, where you're like, well, I'm still queer, even though I seem like I'm in a straight passing relationship, it doesn't erase my queerness. And so I think good authors in the romance genre make sure of that. They take steps to make sure that character's bisexuality isn't completely removed. It's not like you cured me of my bisexuality, but they do find a person that they love regardless of the gender, and they sort of have a happy ending, or a happy for now. And I think the good authors do, or rather the queer authors, or the authors who are aware of queerness, understand that. I think even with Heated Rivalry, which is expressly in the romance genre, Ilya, the character of Ilya, is bisexual, and he just has so much love for Shane. And I think probably maybe a heterosexual person reading that or watching that just might go, oh well, he was actually gay. But I think for those of us who know, and I think that author is queer, or has a queerness, she understands it at least, that we know that it's Ilya being with Shane doesn't erase his bisexuality. It's just that's the person who he fell madly in love with. But yeah, I think that certainly is a trope, where it's that's certainly a stereotype in the queer community, that bisexuals are evil sluts that are greedy and all of that stuff. Those are the stereotypes that are very harmful
and can't be monogamous.
And right? Yeah, how monogamy is a trap for a bisexual person.
Right.
So I think it's interesting to kind of consider that, because it's you're right, what is the ideal situation here? But I think because of the context of it being so extreme, that Sophie is this virginal, beautiful angel, that it's she was so good that she completely erased his desire for anyone else, which I'm there's something icky about that. There's something he became so reformed, Benedict just being I'll do whatever you want. I'm consent king. I just want this to be good for you. I get how that has a romantic place, but there was something about it that was just wait, so in the first 10 minutes of that episode, he's having a full orgy with a bunch of people. MILF Bridgerton is oh my god, my fucking flop son over here is such a deadbeat, and he's just fucking a bunch of people, and now I have to wake him up because he's got to come to the event or whatever. And he's sort of he becomes this reformed rake, which I know is, again, another trope in romance, that it's that is kind of a thing. But I feel it needed to either maybe be more, we needed to see more of a struggle with it, I think, for me to find it interesting or compelling, where, I don't know, there was something it was just so easy for him to completely forget his life as a bisexual slut who's just who's liberated, for him to be sexually liberated was such a wonderful thing. And what I loved about him too is he was bisexual, he was a fop, he was an artist, but kind of not a good one. I was just I love this messy king. He doesn't in the construct of this world where somehow some social norms exist, Anthony went off and had the baby, so he didn't need to worry about that. Colin's gone off and also had a baby and got married. He could just be a horny little artist doing his thing, traipsing around Europe. But for some reason, he had to, in this story, which is probably just the context, every book is about a different sibling or a child of the Bridgerton, that it's I guess this was his story, but it just feels a weird one for him. I'm you kind of forgot that he was bisexual by the end of it.
Yeah, and I feel Bridgerton, maybe especially in this season, they do one of those things that I feel you see in these kind of fantasy romance TV shows or whatever it is, where if some character names the problematic aspect, it excuses the fact that it's there. Like, there might have been one conversation or one moment where Benedict and Sophie acknowledge the existence of his previous male partners. Like, I think there might have been a moment of that. But, you know, for me, that's not enough, right? To, you know, like you said, allow for his bisexuality to still be a part of his identity, right? I think that I also would have liked more of his struggle with that, because I feel like my sense with previous seasons was exactly what you just said. Like, because he's in this position where he has these other brothers, they're sort of handling the heirs and all that stuff. Like, he doesn't really have to play that role. And I feel like he's having some questions around, you know, what do I want my life to look like? How do I want to do this? Like, do I even want to get married? Parallel to Eloise, who at the beginning of this season is like, I'm on the shelf and I'm thrilled to just be committing to the spinster life. And the spinster perspective is something that is having a rise right now, right? It's like a lot of women and people who are expected to fit into this heterosexual marriage trope are opting out of that. And is that spinster?
Yes.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah. And maybe you put yourself in this category, right? Like what if I don't have to do this? Like, I don't have to follow these rules and kind of do this thing. Then what are my other choices? And I think we see Eloise questioning that. But my sense is that the show and the family is going to like shape her up around that. You know, like I feel like there's some hints that the next season might be about her meeting and falling in love with someone, probably in a heterosexual way, which again, like, could Eloise not be a little bit queer? Like, is this not even a question for her? And yeah, again, it's just like, you know, whether queer or not, or wherever that comes from, like, do I have to follow these social rules that have been set out for me? Like, I think that is an interesting question. And again, the fact that that's happening so often in culture right now, where a lot of women are happily choosing to be single and not do the whole marriage and kids thing, the conservative culture is finding that incredibly threatening and needing to correct that out in our fantasies, right? Mm-hmm. Like, again, if this season were created in a slightly different moment, would the show look a little different, right? And maybe it is just seeing a bit more of Benedict, like, having conversations even with Eloise about like what it means to him or what he wants from it, or even if we kind of had him had that moment of like, you know, I've been experimenting with being with men, but it doesn't feel the same to me, or like, I do really love it, but I'm noticing that there's a part of me that really wants to be committed to someone's soul, like, regardless of their gender. Like, there's just different ways that he could have talked about that, right? Yeah. And I think what we see is him under the hypnosis of the special girl, right? And if we go back to the folktales that I was talking about at the beginning, I can't remember the name of this one, but it's something John, you know, this very handsome, rich, wonderful man who just has like a secret cellar full of dismembered ex-wives. You know, like, that's what that folktale is. And it's about, you know, the woman, like, all of the different ways that she tries to escape that. You know, we have him obsessively drawing this woman in silver who, again, Sophie names this at a certain point, and because she names it, it's no longer problematic in the show, right? Where she says something like, he doesn't really want me. Like, he wants the fantasy of the woman in silver. He doesn't really want the human being that I am. And because that one sentence was out there, it made it okay that he was obsessing about this woman whose face he never saw, he never knew her, he just, like, becomes obsessed. That's a bit of a red flag, right? Yeah. Like, that's not what love is. That's what obsession is, right? Or that's what fantasy is. And I think she's right that, you know, that's more realistic of her to look at it that way, that like, he wants this fantasy of a person, and like, oh, how perfect that he fell in love with the human that is Sophie, and that melded with his fantasy of the woman in silver. Like, that's sort of the fantasy ending of that, and again, a little bit of that excuse that makes it okay for it to be that, right? But ultimately, yeah, it's a little disturbing that that's where it came from, and his hypnosis almost entirely erased any questions he had about living that conventional life. Not to mention, you know, he was like considering going to my cottage with her, and they're just living this unconventional life, but it was so clear that he didn't want that. Nobody in his family wanted that. Like, the only way for it to have that fantasy ending was for her to be able to rise to his class and fit the structure of that normative married life that the show certainly believes in. Right?
Yeah, and it was frustrating. Like, I found the ending disappointing in that regard, because it certainly commented all around these things, but in the end, she was able to shoehorn herself into a nobility, which then was like, haha, everything can all work out for everybody then. It just felt very
Right.
like when you're writing, when it's a bit of like, okay, well, you kind of put that there on purpose. Like, it sort of feels like an easy ending that, I don't know, it didn't come together. It wasn't like a satisfying ending, you know, it was like
Like a Deus Ex Machina kind of thing, you mean?
kind of like that. Yeah.
Something coming in and just solving all the problems from nowhere.
Yeah, a little bit. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, well, we're just going to lie about her nobility and we're going to have no consequences. And now she's a perfect silver princess, virgin, so pretty, so beautiful. And now she's also noble. Okay, she's perfect. Now, great. Now, Benedict, you can marry her. Nothing has to change about our lives.
Yeah.
We can still fit within the structure. It just feels like a weird thing to celebrate about it. Like, especially when it was sort of commenting on everything else. Like, I don't know. It just felt very weird.
And I could be forgetting, but I feel like we're also seeing Alfie and some of the other, people in the maid class or whatever it is, like at the wedding, happy for Sophie,
Yeah.
right? But they can't follow her there, right? And there is still this sense of like, they're still separate. And I feel like throughout the show, there was also these moments of like, if you're nice to the help, then it's okay. Right? It's like Violet was so nice, like to her, I don't remember what all of these different roles are called, but like the main housekeeper or whatever she was, and her just being like, okay, make sure the buns are warm, whatever it is, like, thank you, we appreciate your service, and like, we want to help you and all this stuff. It's like, if you're kind of bringing your power to be kind, then that's enough to like let it be okay that there is still this incredibly strong class divide, right?
Yeah, and
like nobody's actually
yeah.
resisting the system.
Totally. And we have that plot line of the maid wars where it's like,
Right.
Like, oh, if they'll pay you more. But then that kind of just dissolves because it was like the maid for the Featherington house just comes back because she's like, well, I didn't like it there. So
You're so true. The maid wars was like this big deal, and then it was just like, oh, it's over now. Like,
Yeah.
oh, great.
and now she's gonna take a lower pay because she likes
Right.
it better, and so should all of you. Actually, it sort of feels like this weird thing of like, you know what? If your pay is lower at your job, but they're nice to you, isn't that wealth, really? It's like, okay, what billionaire had to say on this script? that wants everyone to shut up?
Totally. Yeah.
You know?
Such a capitalist agenda.
Like,
Yeah.
so anti-union. Like, finally the maids, like, there's a conversation around the maids, like, being treated with respect, and then it's like, well, you know what really is respect? MILF Bridgerton being nice to you. It's very pizza party. It's like, wow, what if we give you a pizza party? It's like, I want an increase in pay so I can afford my rent, actually. Or like,
Yeah.
they obviously live there, but it's like, they're indentured servants. Like, they
Yeah,
don't have any
absolutely.
other option. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just wanted to like circle back to the Eloise of it all because I love Eloise. I've loved that actress and that character since season 1. Like, she's been one of my favorite characters, and this season we didn't really get a lot of her. I wanted a lot more of her, and I agree. Like, they really established like Eloise and Benedict being really good friends. Like, they go out on the swings and they have a cigarette or whatever, and I would have loved a lot more of them because I think that like she could have had a lot to teach him, or just been a sounding board for him. And yeah, there's something very like asexual queen about Eloise. Like, she is of the LGBTQ.
Love that. Yeah, and she gets put in her place a little bit, I think, in this season.
Yeah.
And like, fair enough that Hyacinth really wants to go in this direction, her younger sister. And she's quite judgmental of that. And I think it's fair to kind of be like, if your sister wants that, like that, she's allowed to want this as well. Like, that's okay,
Yeah.
But at the same time, it did feel a little bit of a schooling of Eloise, that it's just like, well, you're an idiot if you want to be a spinster, and that's not really what you want. Like, don't be ridiculous, Andrea. Everybody wants this. It's like a little bit of that feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then she might be the next Bridgerton to fall in love and have a heterosexual romance in some way. And, there is also one thing that I will flag, though, is that Francesca might be the queer narrative that's to come next.
I was gonna say that
I
too.
haven't read the books, but apparently in the books, after John dies, Michael, his cousin, and Francesca have like a romance, and so it's Michaela in the show.
Yeah.
So somebody has a queer like intention. There is a queer intention here. Like, something is going to happen around that, and you know, whenever the next season comes out, we'll see which way the winds are blowing, right? Like, where are we in terms of that? Like, are we in a place of wanting to celebrate queerness and choice and, you know, different types of bodies and all of that stuff? Or are we in this, like, very conservative trad wife, like, moment where we still want to put women and people who refuse the gender binary in their place, right? Not to mention the class piece. So we'll kind of have to see what they do with it next.
Yeah, it was interesting because at the end of 3, like the one before this one, when she's introduced to Michaela, she has a breath, and
yeah,
it's like she's very happy with John because he's also maybe autistic and she's autistic and they like the quiet and whatever, and they have this connection, but she experiences this moment of like her breath being taken away by Michaela when she is introduced to her. And then that just, you know, and then she kind of doesn't like Michaela at the beginning, which is like, she's probably got some internalized homophobia going on there, very real. Yeah. But I wasn't satisfied with that, like the way that played out in this season. Like, I felt like there needed to be more of her being like, oh God, like her talking about the pinnacle. But why didn't we have a scene of her like thinking of Michaela and achieving the pinnacle, you know, like... Maybe that's what the problem was, but it maybe because she's too innocent about it. I don't know. Like, it felt like we were really missing some of the build that I felt like, oh, maybe they're just being friends. And at the end, Michaela escapes.
This show knows how to do sexual tension. Mm-hmm. And there was not any. I mean, there was sort of that moment at the end where, you know, you're aware of it and Michaela's like, oh, of course I'll stay for you. And then she has like a look or something. And you're like, what's that? And that was about it, right? But I feel like there could have been so many ways to kind of show sexual tension between the two of them, even without Francesca knowing that that's what it was, right? Totally. Like, she is so innocent and sweet, but I feel like you could see her flushing a little bit around Michaela or having, like, locking eyes in a dance playfully or something like that. Like, there's so many ways that they could have brought that forward, and maybe they will in the next season. Like, again, it's not impossible. But I think you're right that we did not... Even if there is a queer intention there, in this particular season, I didn't feel it. I didn't see it.
Yeah,
right. Like, there was some weird relationship between the two of them, but there was no indication that there was attraction from Francesca's side at this point.
Yeah, because she was so focused on, and like then we had to not deal with, but like John dies, and spoiler, and so we have to deal with that. And I felt like they dealt with that in a really nice way, and I felt like they kind of shoehorned this like, oh, she has to pretend she's pregnant because of the air of the whatever and the blah blah blah. Like that all happened very fast. Like there should have been more, like even when they stayed up all night laughing and stuff. What if we saw a little bit of that, and we saw a moment where she's a little drunk and kind of looking at her like... A hand
touch, leaning in a little too close, like,
Why didn't we see that? Yeah. Like, it felt weird that we just talked about that instead of showing it.
Right.
Which is you're right, it's very different than what we've seen in previous seasons. Like, they could have really built that tension for us to kind of, like, buy that, maybe next season she's horny for her, you know?
We'll see. All right. Well, thanks so much, Emilee, as always, for sharing your thoughts and feelings on Bridgerton Season 4. It was a delight.
Thanks for having me. Yes. I love to yap, so.
Yeah, and we'll see, right? Next season, we'll see if they meet our expectations or our hopes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We'll see if there's more bisexual or gay fantasy waiting for us.
That's what we want. Yeah. That's what we want. Give it to us.
Exactly. Thank you.
Thanks, Emilee.